as Duff said, the man with 9 lives. Actually, he had 12 attempts on his life from 1946 until 1951. Herbert was a very interesting fellow. So who was he? He was born in 1909. His family moved to West Dallas when he was 9 years old. Oh, I'm sorry, I may have to do it like this. So he and his family moved to West Dallas in 1909. So think about it. Who was in West Dallas? Well, you had the Barrows, the Hamiltons, and other West Dallas toughs. He grew up with those people. He finished school at age 16. He became a licensed commercial pilot in the 1930s. That comes into play later on in the story. He became a gambler in the 1930s, and in 1930 he married a woman named Mildred Bowers. Sadly, she came to a sad end. In 1931, they had a daughter born to them named Frida. And as Duff said, he owned a ranch here in the Flower Mound area. I'll talk more about that ranch later on. So Dallas was a gambling town from the 1920s through the mid-1940s. One of the bigwigs was a gentleman named Warren Diamond, lived at 4224 Armstrong in Highland Park. So he was actually a pharmacist, if I remember correctly. Games were held in hotels such as the St. George and the Southland Hotel. Benny Binion, the rival of Herbert Noble, was in the Southland Hotel, and it was known as the Southland Hotel Syndicate. The envelopes, what about an envelope? Well, a lot of the gambling was either poker or craps. And so in craps, you have a guy who's called a fader. He's the gentleman who's going to cover all the bets. So Diamond was running his game one night, Binion was working with him, and this gentleman shows up with a very thick envelope. Throws the envelope down on the table and tells Diamond, "I'm going to make you look." Diamond says, "No, you're not. Give him the dice." So the guy crapped out after 2 throws, meaning he lost everything. Warren Diamond opens the envelope. 171 $1,000 bills were in the envelope. So Binion learned from that is never turn down a bet. His casino in Las Vegas will take any bet. They'll cover anything. Going rate for protection was 25% of your take. Now we had policy wheels, sort of like the lottery we have today. You had poker games, you had craps, you had all roulette wheels, you name it, you had it. But the people who ran these games had to pay protection to Warren Diamond. They paid him 25% of their take. And it was on the honor system. He had nobody coming in, he expected you to be honest and give him his 25%. So they did that. Now remember that 25% because that's going to come into play later on. Going forward here. Sorry about that. He also built, so what you see down here is his mausoleum. He built that mausoleum in the 1920s for his family, $65,000. It's still available to be seen. It's over there. Let me find my notes. Yep. Where was he? Grove Hill Cemetery is where it is. You can go visit that and see his mausoleum. It's got his whole family in there. So let's get here. Not enough room on this table for me. That's right. So dropping a dime. Well, we know that we still use that term today. We want to drop a dime on somebody. We want to rat them out. There's a gentleman named Sam Murray came to town. He was a major rival of Benny Binion's in the 1930s. He had a ranch out on Jim Miller Road in East Dallas. In June 14th, 1940, and he ran policy games, he ran crap games, he did everything. He and his wife came to Dallas, and a Binion compatriot named Ivy Miller knew he was coming to town. Somebody had dropped a dime on him. And it was at the Dallas National Bank. Murray's coming out. His wife had gone to Neiman Marcus to do some shopping. Murray comes out of the bank, and Ivy Miller's there, sees him, pulls out his gun, and puts 7 shots into him. Murray reached down, grabbed his .38 snub-nosed revolver and fired back, hitting a young man, a 16-year-old, in the leg. Fortunately, there were two police officers cruising around. They pulled up and told Ivy to give it up, drop his gun. He did, and his excuse was he shot first. Not really. But anyway, rumor has it that they think that Herbert Noble, who was the bodyguard for Murray, had dropped the dime on him. He ended up taking over all of Murray's games in town. That's how he got into being a gambler boss. So Binion and Noble, polar opposites. Binion took over control of gambling in Dallas during the war years. Everyone, including Noble, paid the 25% of their take. It was the honor system. Binion believed that Noble was shorting him. As a result, in late 1945, Binion told Noble he would be put on a hard count. In other words, one of Binion's people would go every night to where Noble had his games and watch him count out the winnings. And he didn't like that. He ran a club at the Dallas Airmen Club at 1710 and a half Live Oak. And Binion told him, in stronger terms, but politely told him, no, I'm not going to pay you. And as a result of that, started the war between Binion and Noble. Binion didn't like being told no. He wanted people to take care of him. So the first attempt on Noble's life took place as he locked up the Airmen's Club at 1710 and a half. Here on the right, it was actually a hotel up above that Murray had his operations. On the left, we see Noble out on the country road near his ranch in Flower Mound, and that's his car. Life magazine came and did a story on him. Took a lot of photographs. So he's showing the photographer where some of this stuff happened in his deal. So we'll go back and say, let me talk about Binion and Noble again, because it's fascinating. So Binion was born in Pilot Point, Texas in 1904. He left home at 15, working in El Paso in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Worked in cattle, traded horses, gambled, and bootlegged. He finally settled down in Dallas towards the end of World War I and apprenticed himself to Warren Diamond. Binion was also somewhat illiterate, but he had a mind for numbers. So that's a good thing that a gambling boss needs. He cut ties with Diamond in 1926 and established his own craps game in room 226 of the Southland Hotel, which you saw earlier, which eventually became the headquarters for his game, the Southland Hotel Group. Diamond committed suicide in 1932 because he had prostate cancer. He checked himself out of the St. Paul Hospital, drove to his house on Armstrong, got into the tub, and shot himself. And I know some friends who were in there, and they kept saying, we've seen Diamond's ghost in the house. Doug Swanson described Binion as a canny, shrewd, and pragmatic businessman. Though he could barely read or write, he either controlled his rivals or had them killed. Noble was the antithesis of Binion. Suave, debonair, a licensed pilot, well-educated compared to Binion. After the hit on Murray, Noble took over Murray's games, established the Airmen's Club on Live Oak, as well as games in other locations. The two came to loggerheads, as I said, in January of 46, when Noble told him, I'm not going to pay you 40%. You'll get your 25%. Binion also demanded that one of his men watch the count. He refused on that. So Noble once told a reporter that Binion's attacks on his life were not motivated by gambling or money, but pride. I won't bow down to him, and he hates me because of it, Noble said. Also in 1946, a reform group had elected a new DA and county sheriff. The group wanted to clean up Dallas, especially the gambling. Binion saw the handwriting on the wall and left for Las Vegas at the end of 1946. He basically got into his Cadillac, his convertible Cadillac, had his driver, and rumor has it that he had $1 million in the trunk of the car. So, yeah, all sorts of fun things go on. Binion is really a character, and I'll share some books later on with him. So anyway, on the night of January 15th, 1946, Noble closes up his club and gets in his car and heads out to his ranch in Flower Mound. Not far out of town, a car started following him and quickly came up behind him. The occupants started firing at Noble, who fired back, the two cars racing along at speeds up to 90 miles per hour. Can you imagine 90 miles an hour on that dirt road? Noble had a Mercury, which was a nice fast car in those days. Anyway, about a mile from his ranch, his car skidded off the road and into a ditch. He scrambled out of the wreck and headed towards a farmhouse, his neighbor's. And as he did that, the pursuers slid to a stop, jumped out, and started firing again at him. One hit him in the back, and just above his left hip. He was able to crawl to his neighbor's house, hide underneath the porch. The neighbor came out and goes, "What the hell's going on here?" He came out with his rifle and demanded to know what was going on. Noble's pursuers climbed back into their car and headed back to Dallas. Noble was taken to Methodist Hospital. So, yeah, very interesting fellow. And we suspect that Binion had put a hit out on him. For I want Noble dead. I'll pay $50,000 to the first person who takes care of this scoundrel for me. So Binion's ranch was called the Diamond M. I've never found out why it was called the Diamond M. Located in what is now Flower Mound, had more than 800 acres. It's been described variously as either 4 miles northeast of Grapevine or 7 miles north of Grapevine. Never can figure out. He had over 200 head of Hereford cattle, turkeys, guinea hens, and 2 tamed deer. The ranch became his refuge. He built cabins on the property for private poker games. 2 of those cabins still exist today out on Noble Point. He would fly gamblers into his ranch. He had several aircraft, 2 Beech Stagger Wings, which are fantastic aircraft. But he'd fly people in, and he would use the planes to survey his property. But because he was so far out in the nowhere land, he knew when the law enforcement was coming, so he could shut down the games, and they couldn't find anything. He became somewhat of an insomniac as the attacks continued. He would drive around with a M1 carbine on the seat next to him, 30 caliber. He had it in his bed. We'll show some other pictures. Well, you see one right up here. There's his bed. He's got his gun. His house is a nice house, 9 rooms. He had floodlights put all over the place, and he had several dogs, including Chihuahuas. He had the Chihuahuas in the house because they would go yap, 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 and let him know if something was going on that he didn't like. Any questions? Okay, we'll continue on. That I don't know. I haven't found anything, and the aerial photographs are tough because of all the trees. So I suspect it's not around. It's probably torn down. The next attack on him occurred on August 19th, 1946 at Arthur Thomas's gambling establishment at Knox and Travis in Dallas. Everybody knows where Knox Street is. Noble and his partner Jack Darby had gone there to collect $12,000 from Eddie Gilliland. When Noble entered, Darby was drunk, pulled out a pistol, and shot at Noble several times. Noble's feet, threatening to kill him. Darby was disarmed. It was said that Binion had offered Darby a large money roll and big percentage of a downtown crap game if he would get rid of Noble. Noble left with his $12,000. Things calmed down for 2 years. He still ran his gambling operation at the Airmen's Club. But on the night of May 20th, 1948, Noble was ambushed as he drove across the cattle guard entrance to his ranch, which you see right here. His arm was riddled with buckshot, but he was able to drive to the ranch house. He destroyed the cattle guard to prevent anyone from driving in at that entrance to the ranch. Almost a full year passed before there were any more attacks on Noble. On February 14th, a friend noticed a man working underneath Noble's car outside the Airmen's Club. He ran upstairs to warn Noble. Two police vice officers came over and examined the car and determined that the individual had wired dynamite to the underside of the car. There's a theme to this whole thing. They liked either shooting him or blowing him up. And, it's interesting because it was either dynamite or nitroglycerin gel. Nitroglycerin gel is more powerful, and it was readily available because they used that to frack the wells in East Texas and elsewhere in Texas. So you drop nitroglycerin or dynamite down a well and it'd frack and you can get more oil. So nobody kept track of the stuff, but there were guys known throughout the country as, hey, you need to see this guy if you want somebody killed. He'll blow him up for you. On September 7th, 1949, Jack Nesbitt and Jim Thomas attacked Noble near his ranch, shooting him in the leg. Nesbitt was arrested but not indicted. Information had been received that these men had been hired by Benny Binion. But the next attack on November 29th, 1949 was the most devastating and tragic act. This is the one everybody wants to know about. So on this day, November 29th, 1949, Noble lived at 311 Conrad Street in the Beckleywood subdivision. It was on what is now the east side of I-35. It's actually covered up. I've driven past the point. He was always trying to find a way to get out of the gambling business. So he had the ranch, he ran cattle. He was going to buy an airfield north of Fort Worth called Hicks Field. It had been used as a training ground and maintenance area during World War II. He had worked a deal. He needed to borrow his wife's Cadillac because he had a couple of bankers coming into town and another fellow, and the Cadillac was a nicer vehicle. It rode better than his Mercury. So he takes the car early in the morning to go pick up his people and head over to Fort Worth. About mid-morning, Mildred came out, and she was excited about this venture of his because she worried about him getting killed. She didn't like that, and she dreaded the thought of a late-night phone call saying that Herbert was dead. She wasn't involved in his gambling pursuits. Instead, she strove to create a life like that of the city's merchant class. Domestic help, luncheons, church committees, a house in town, and a country retreat. Their daughter Frida attended a Virginia boarding school. So he was driving these people. As he said, it was a nicer ride. He drove away from the house and got to Fort Worth about an hour later. About mid-morning, Mildred left the house, planning to go to the ranch and pick up their maid, who would help her prepare a celebratory dinner that night for his closing of this business deal on the airfield. She goes out to the Mercury, gets in, steps on the starter, kablooey. The explosion was heard over 8 miles away. A car door was flung over 2 rows of houses, landing in a backyard next to a child's sandbox. Her body was flung from the car, landing in the front yard. In fact, if you see it down here, and I'll show some of these other pictures clearer, but that white, that's her body. One of the neighbors came and put a sheet over her. A neighbor called the police in Fort Worth. Noble had completed signing the purchase papers when he was told he had a phone call. Picking up the receiver, he listened in silence, then said, "Dead?" Putting down the receiver, he turned to the others saying, "The bastard killed my wife." Noble purchased a solid bronze 2-ton casket for his wife for a reported $15,000, said to be the most expensive one in Dallas. 700 people crowded into the Lamar and Smith funeral home at 800 West Jefferson. Another 400 people waited outside. 11 pallbearers were needed to move the casket, and 100 cars formed the funeral procession to Sparkman Hillcrest up on Northwest Highway and Hillcrest Road. It was the 6th attempt on Noble's life. So what you see here, that's her casket, and look at all the flowers. So he wasn't somebody that wasn't unknown in the city. There were a lot of people who respected him and respected his wife, and delivered that. The smaller picture, and I've got a better view of it, that's his daughter Frida in the car. So she came home and saw that.
So she was driving his car that day?
She drove his car, and so
They went after her.
they were after him, and he had that Mercury that you saw in an earlier picture. And you could see here on the left, it literally blew the car down to the chassis. And they determined that it was connected, the battery had been connected, the bomb had been connected to the generator, and it was nitroglycerin gel. So a little thing of nitroglycerin gel is a lot more powerful than a couple of sticks of dynamite. So he's, yeah. So like I say, come on, mouse. So these are more of the Life magazine photographs. There he is in his car with the carbine next to him. There's his bedroom. He's looking around. He put floodlights all around the house so that he could see what was going on. There's one of the Chihuahuas, his pet parrot. But the Chihuahuas had free roam of the house to keep everything. He abandoned his Oak Cliff house, returned to his ranch, bought 6 Chihuahuas to serve as a warning system, yapping at any sounds that might be an intruder. He stayed up all night armed with a rifle and unable to sleep. He became a pretty much of a drinker, mainly beer, but he would drink case after case of beer. When morning would come, he'd get in his car and drive to the cemetery to visit his wife's grave. He always put flowers on her grave. On New Year's Eve 1949, he was at his Oak Cliff home with his daughter. She was probably home for Christmas break when he decided to go to the drugstore. As he left the house at 9 p.m., he was bathed in the white light from a car's spotlight. And you remember the days cars had those spotlights. Okay, so that was done. Shots were fired. His left elbow was shattered by a round, which went through his hip and lodged near his spine. Remember, he's already had a bullet in his spine before. He was able to crawl into the house where his daughter was able to call for an ambulance. Noble refused to go to the ambulance until the police arrived. He didn't trust anybody. 5 weeks after being shot, he was still recovering from his wounds in a private room at Methodist Hospital when about 11 p.m. on the night of February 6, 1950, a lone gunman standing in one of the hospital's courtyards took aim at a shadowy figure in the 4th floor room. Noble was just coming out of the bathroom when the gunman fired. The round missed, lodging in the ceiling. Noble dropped to the floor, crawled to the wall socket, and unplugged a lamp. The gunman escaped. They just kept going after this gentleman. These were the 7th and 8th attempts on his life. So if we're keeping count, I've got a full account later on. So June 13th, 1950, he's driving his car. This is his replacement Mercury. Notice these are all bullet holes in the car. He was driving from his ranch. He was attacked by 3 punks he cursed out in West Dallas. So they riddled his car with bullets. He showed up later on with the sheriff Bill Decker, to say what was going on. He was good for, Decker knew everybody in the gambling world, in the gangster world. Down here we go. So I mentioned earlier he had his own airplanes. So somebody had come in and put some nitroglycerin gel in some of the cylinders. This is a radial engine. If you understand, there's separate cylinders for each in these engines. So somebody had put them one night in the thing, and the engine wouldn't start. And his mechanic said, well, look here, we've got all this other stuff in here. And then another time they came out, somebody put more nitroglycerin gel in the cylinders. He started up the engine. He was in the cockpit, and it went boom. But the steel firewall protected him from it. There's an interesting thing, as I say, he flew gamblers in to play high-stake poker games and stuff like that. But at one time, he was still upset over his wife's death, and he still felt that Binion was responsible. So he decided to use his beach stagger wing to bomb Binion's Las Vegas house. Oh, this is a good one. Noble attached hard points to the plane's wings, and where he would mount 2 bombs, one high explosive, the other napalm. He would fly to a private strip in Arizona where he could refuel and then fly to Las Vegas. Fortunately, a friend of his who worked for the Dallas police came out to the ranch one day to visit and saw Herbert working on his plane. He asked, what was he doing? And Noble broke down in tears, crying that Binion got all the breaks. The officer was able to dispose of the bombs and nothing more was said. On January 10th, 1951, he went out to start up one of his planes and it would not. They determined, this is where they discovered the 2 cylinders were filled with large chunks of nitroglycerin jelly. And in March, he climbed aboard, and that's when the firewall saved his life. Those were attempts 10 and 11. Okay, we're keeping count here. So he's interesting. I first learned about him when I was the photo archivist for the Dallas Public Library back in 1980 to 84. And I came across these photographs of him. And I said, who is this character? And I started studying him. Well, the fateful day was August 7th, 1951. For several days, neighbors had seen a blue pickup cruise up and down the dirt roads near Noble's ranch. No one took much notice of the 3 men. Then one night the men returned. They began digging a hole in front of Noble's mailbox. Into that hole they buried dynamite, blasting gas, and nitroglycerin. They weren't leaving anything to chance. They then connected the explosives with a wire to a Delco car battery buried near the mailbox. From there, they ran another wire to a hiding place 60 yards away. This is a map that was in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. So you can see where his mailbox is, the 60 yards, and then 150 yards away, the killer's trucks were. The killers were hiding up above, and you'll see a picture of that later on. One drove the truck down the road and out of sight. The other 2 men hid in the brush, waiting for Noble to show up. He would check his mail every day because he was getting letters from around the world from people. You know, every time he appeared in the newspaper, or they would write to him. As dawn broke, Noble got up and prepared to go to town. Sadly, he is still suffering from his wife's loss. He had been drinking heavily over the years. He had become estranged from his daughter Frida, who married a young man that Noble disapproved of. This happened when she was up at school in Denver, in college. Noble had written a new will, leaving her only $10 out of his estate, worth close to $1 million later on after his death. That included the Airmen's Club, the 800-acre ranch, 5 airplanes, and 195 head of cattle. About 11:30, he left his house, taking his carbine, $6,000 in cash, and his playing cards. Oh, these guys had money on them all the time. Noble enjoyed checking his mail as he received lots of letters from around the country after each attempt on his life. Noble stopped his car right on top of the buried bomb. As he reached for his mailbox, the assassins touched a copper wire to the barbed wire, grounding the connection, and there he went up. That's the result here on the right is his car. I mean, just incredible force. Here on the left, you can see the battery. I'll show better pictures of these, but there's the battery buried. In the middle picture, the gentleman on the left in the Hawaiian shirt, that's a Texas Ranger, L.C. Rigler. He was out of Sulphur Springs, I think. The gentleman with the white cane, you can barely see it right next to Rigler, that's the Denton County Sheriff. He was blind. And so he always had a gentleman escorting him, and I can't remember the other gentleman. Pardon? Justice is blind. Justice is blind, exactly. You can see the scattered playing cards here. It tore his car up. The hole was 3 feet deep and 5 feet across. And, you know, that's that tough North Texas soil. So, you know, they had to really work at it to bury that bomb. This is one of the gentlemen taking the battery away. You can see the sheriff on the left being escorted out. There's the wire that was dug. They actually took it down the culvert, down to a culvert, and drug it through the culvert and up across the road. So people were asking, where do we go? The barbed wire grounding it. So what happened? Let's see. There we go. Like I say, the explosion created a hole that was 5 feet across and 4 feet deep, tore the car apart, flipping it on its back. One of Noble's legs was flung towards the killer's hideout, which is 60 yards away. The mailbox flew 75 feet. Noble's body was gone below his waist. Near the destroyed car lay cash and 2 playing cards face up, a joker and the ace of diamonds. It was 90 minutes after the explosion before one of his neighbors, George Cunningham, drove by, saw what was happening. He drove into town to report it to the police. 3.5 hours later is when the sheriffs showed up. And that was Lewis Rigler, the county sheriff was W.O. Hodges, and the gentleman on the far right was Deputy Sheriff Roy Baker. U.S. postal inspectors also showed up. Any reason why postal inspectors? The mailbox, exactly.
Everybody heard that explosion?
Oh, they heard it, yeah. They didn't think anything of it, people are blowing up stuff all the time. You wanted to move rocks, you blew them up, whatever. You could go down to the local hardware store and get yourself dynamite, You want to clear stumps? Dig a hole, put dynamite, boom, out it goes, They found few clues beyond the battery and the wires that connected to the bomb. Took measurements, dusted for fingerprints, and drew maps. As Swanson wrote, they could have put all their clues in a suitcase and had room left over for what remained of Noble. Yeah. A Houston Press reporter called Binion in Las Vegas to inform of Noble's death. Binion said, "I'm glad he's dead." On August 9th, Herbert was laid to rest at Sparkman Hillcrest Memorial Cemetery next to his wife, Mildred. The cat had run out of lives. So let me show, there's a newsreel footage on a different one. I'm going to advance forward.
Who was that beautiful house?
I'll get to that one. I'll get to that. So this is a WBAP newsreel, and it's available online at the portal to Texas history as part of the WBAP collection. You can see them carrying out the battery. They were uncovering it. There goes the sheriff with his deputy. Lots of crowds, lots of photographers. I can't remember that photographer's name, but he was well known at the time, and they used those. So there's that. But let's go back to that house. That's a good one. So what you see on the left is reconstructed poker cabins that he had built. I believe he had 4, 2 of them survive. The address is 1213 Noble Way, Herbert Noble, and it's on Noble Point. And that his daughter sold the land in the late 1990s to a developer, and that's the house that was built on that property. Now, to show you how, it wasn't just Noble who got shot at or bombed at. There was a gentleman who was one of Binion's characters. One of his second-hand men, a guy named Bobby or Buddy Minyard. He and his wife lived on Avalon in the Lakewood area. Very nice house. He came home one night after going out to dinner with his wife, let her out, went into the garage, came out, locked the garage door, and somebody stood up from the bushes and fired a buckshot at him in his back, killing him. I work for the city of Dallas as the records management officer, and we have old homicide cases. And we had received a request from the Special Investigation Unit, the cold case people, for a file. So I went to the box to pull it out, and I recognized two names. One of them was Mildred Noble. So I pulled it up, and I said, sure enough, it's her case file. Not much to it. Then the other one was Buddy Minyard, his case file. So the police were able to determine it was not an attempted robbery of Minyard, but a hit, because he had $2,500 on him in cash. These people walked around, that was walking around money, sort of thing. But that's the house. It exists, aerial photographs and stuff. There is a news story about it. There's a link to the secondshelter.com. It was an article about it. So if we go...
How did the daughter end up with the property to sell?
Okay, so when Herbert died, remember, he wrote a will and said she's only going to get $10. He left everything to his brother. Well, Frida got with her uncle and said, wait a minute. And she actually filed suit against him. Well, they settled it out of court. He had always intended the brother to give her what she deserved, because he didn't think that Herbert had done her right. So she got the ranch and some other stuff. The estate was $1 million. They split it pretty much 50-50. And she held on to it for the longest period of time. And I was surprised when I stumbled across that story about the land being bought up and the new house being put up. Anyway, here is the timeline of the 12 attacks. January 15th in 1946, August 19th, 1946, May 20th, all the way down to August 7th, 1951. Another little fact about Dallas gambling. So in the 1930s, during the Depression, City of Dallas had a $250,000 shortfall in their budget. So they passed some ordinances that said, okay, if you get caught gambling, it's $10 a head. So every Friday, the police would show up at these gambling places where they knew they were, and they would count heads, and then either the gambler running the operation or his attorney would show up at the municipal court and hand over the cash money for the fines. That helped the city make up the shortfall. So that's how important it was to them. Yeah. So they had all of that going on for them. There's a number of books or sources that I used in this story. So Gary Cartwright, he had a Texas Monthly article called Benny and the Boys. Bethany Erickson in the Regal Grapevine Estate, Far Cry from Time, owned by Dallas mobsters, Second Shelters. That was the story about his house. Deep Elm in the Central Track, Leslie Warren's Dallas Public and Private, story about the palatial estate, Darwin Payne's book, Big D, Triumphs and Troubles. These are all the things. The Hayes collection, which has a lot of these items. I've got three of the books that I used here, so you're welcome to come up and take a look at them after I finish. So Bill McClanahan, many people remember him. He was the chief editorial cartoonist for the Dallas Morning News. So on the left-hand side is the cartoon he wrote for Noble after his death, and of course he rolled snake eyes. Yeah, anyway, one of the other things that happened one night is Noble was driving back along Singleton Boulevard, and he ran into a guy named Jack Todd at a grocery store there. Jack Todd was one of Binion's guys. The two got into a fight, and Todd bit off Noble's earlobe. So here you can see what remains of his earlobe. Yeah, he's he was a snappy dresser, but he was not willing to let anybody get away with stuff. So one of the other things is that Binion, like all people in crime, they get caught not because they killed somebody, but because they didn't pay their income taxes. And so he had to be extradited and come back to Texas to go to trial for income tax evasion. So he did serve time in federal prison for. So what you're seeing here is a raid on one of Binion's places where they actually were counting the take from the policy system. They were ratted out, so to speak. Somebody did it, so they came in, and that's what eventually was used to convict him of income tax evasion, because they had the books. How many people were Binion. So they had that. This again, so this is at the funeral. So there we go. They each took a flower from the grave and put them into cellophane, but that's his daughter, Frida.
Is she still alive, Frida?
Let's see. Well, she was born in 31, so she would be 93 if she were alive. I don't know. I've been searching for obituaries and haven't found anything yet. Or I don't know if she had any children either. So this is him. This is the one where the cylinders actually blew up. And so he's examining the things. And he would have put the shackles for the 2 bombs underneath the wings here. Nice fellow. That's his car again. So this shows the bullet holes a little bit better. So, you know, we got 3, 6, 9, about 12 to 15 bullet holes on him. He looks so calm and collected there and sitting in the car. But that's over at the police department. This is the thing. And this gentleman's standing in the hole where the bomb was. So that gives you a good idea of how deep that hole was. This is his car. Pretty well mangled. They must have put a ton of stuff in there to take care of it. I mean, here's his gas tank. Surprised that didn't go up in flames. There he is again with that. So let's go ahead and close these because.
Is whatever they found left, is he buried in his mausoleum?
No, that's Warren Diamond who had the mausoleum. Noble's buried next to his wife Mildred up at Sparkman Hillcrest. There's no headstone. That's just got one of those flat tablets in the ground for them. So this gives you, so there's the battery that they talk about that was buried on the opposite side of the thing. And they ran the wire down the culvert to another culvert that ran underneath the road up to where the thing was.
That took some doing. I'm surprised that nobody ever saw them do it.
Well, that's just it, you know, but you're out in the middle of the country.
Was that a private road or was it?
No, it was a county road. It was a county road. But there wasn't that many people along there. Yes, sir.
I was there on the 7th, after he was blown up. It was a Saturday afternoon, about 4:30, when Elizabeth ambulance came down Main Street, brought his remains to Allison Clinic. Word spread that they had got Noble, and my dad was the mayor. So we went over there, saw the car, saw the hole. We had seen him the Sunday before down in the river bottom where the new channel went.
Yep.
It was to go through the dam. He was down there in that creek bottom, and he stopped and was talking to my dad. He had opened the door, and he had on one of these white T-shirts like the men used to wear with the shoulders.
Yep.
And had shorts on. Had a Great Dane in the back of the car. He had a long gun over his lap, and he opened the door to the driver's deal, and he had a machine gun and another gun strapped to the door. There were other machine guns strapped to the passenger door, and he had several long guns there. It was a dark blue car. I thought it was a 48 or 49 Ford, but it was dark blue.
Right.
And he talked to my dad for a while. I don't know whether I assume the Great Danes probably got blown up with the car, but we went over there, and I I remember that map differently. I don't know where that map came from, but we walked up to see the detonator and the wire was still there in the detonator. I thought that picture shows that wire ran right down the road.
No, they didn't run down the road. They ran it down the side of the road to a culvert.
We saw the tracks where his car, the guy, the killer, had driven in there and parked his car. You could see his tracks, and the detonator was still there. But I thought it was up the hill, right across from the mailbox. Not that.
Yeah, it was. This is the
other direction. So
this is the Texas Ranger.
how they ran that wire down the road?
Well, they ran it to the side of the road.
I don't remember it that way. It ran up the hill there.
Well, anyway, this is the Lewis Wrigler, the Texas Ranger, and he's at the spot where the killers were, and he's showing how they connected the wire to close the circuit and detonate the bomb. Interesting, because that's not what he has. They just touch the wires.
Anyway, I saw all that. I was 9 years old, and Wanda Wilhoy was over there too. She got a piece of his body.
Oh, yummy. Here's another view of his car. You can see the hole there. It literally just threw it up and down. So once again, here's the Wrigler and unknown gentleman, the county sheriff, deputy sheriff, examining everything. So we have that. These were from UT Arlington. So they have a fabulous collection, a historic photograph collection, as does the Dallas Library. And all of these things are available up on the portal to Texas history.
What got you started?
So I was the photo archivist for the Dallas Public Library from 1980 to 84, and we had what's called the Hayes Collection. They were a commercial photography firm that had a contract with the Dallas Times-Herald to produce news photographs, but they also did commercial work on the side. Denny Hayes, the father, had worked for another Dallas photographer called Frank Rogers. Well, you've seen the pictures of Bonnie and Clyde on the slabs out in Louisiana. Denny Hayes took those photographs, and the library, Dallas Public Library, has the original negatives for those, because he drove all the way out to Louisiana to take those pictures. They also took the pictures of the funerals of Bonnie and Clyde and things like that. So I got to work with what's really important historical evidence. We can read the words all we want, but when you've got images that show exactly what it was, that's a little bit different. So I stumbled upon the Noble pictures and I started digging, and it's always been on my mind. And then Legacies is every January, and they have a theme, and for 2021 the theme was crime. And I said, here's an opportunity that I can do on Herbert Noble and whatnot. And so they always publish. The journal is published twice a year, once right after the conference, and then we just received that issue today, and then there'll be another one in the fall. So my article is there. It's available online, and it's based upon what I did here with the thing. So I've got 2 degrees in history, so, I enjoy it. And so it's always trying to do something of interest like that. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Did they ever figure out who did it?
No, they never did. Never did. There was some rumors as to who it might be, but they never found anybody. The blue pickup truck was the only clue that they had, this truck driving up and down the roads. You think about it, if you live in the country, you know who your neighbors are. You know what they drive. And when you start to see a car that's not from the area, you start to, what is this, what is that? You keep an eye on them. So that was the clue. That was one of the things that when the law enforcement showed up, they said, hey, you need to be looking for a blue pickup truck. They kept driving down, they were parked over here, but there just weren't enough clues. Nothing that the battery could be identified by, no serial number, where did it come from, anything like that.
Plus, he had a big shovel somewhere.
Well, a big shovel, picks, you name it, you know. That's amazing that they're, but, you know, the dynamite and blasting caps and nitroglycerin gel was a small packet compared to burying that battery, you know, sort of thing.
Any other questions? This is so interesting.
Thank you all for having me. You're welcome to come up and look at the books that I have here.